Welcome everyone to one of the final sessions of SpringOne. How's everyone had their time during the conference? Was okay? All right. So this afternoon we have the keynote, and this is probably one of the last sessions. So I hope I'm not going to be too boring, so everyone stays awake and goes home with a great feeling. So I'm going to be talking about how to write your own Spring Boot starter, and how the Spring Boot starter, how they actually work in the Spring Boot ecosystem. And my name is Hubau, by the way. You can see my Twitter handle there if you want to see some goofy stuff during the week and some geeky stuff. So a little bit about me. I won't keep it too long. That's my name. I'm a Java consultant in Belgium at Ordina. I work in the JWorks unit. We basically do Java and JavaScript consultancy. We have about 100 people. I'm the cloud and PaaS competence lead, so we organize workshops for our colleagues and for external people about anything related to PaaS and cloud. So Cloud Foundry, Kubernetes, all this kind of stuff, and the different offerings. We take care of that. I've been a Spring lover since I've been developing in Java for about 10 years now. So I wasn't at the very beginning of Spring, but I've seen a lot of evolutions going on. I like to game, I blog a bit, I code in my free time, just side projects. And I'm an avid soccer player, so if anyone enjoys soccer, yeah. We say football, but yeah, so everyone understands. This is my very informal picture. They told us to take an informal picture, so I took one, and then I saw when I was selected that all the rest had really formal pictures, so I'm probably the only one with alcohol in my hand in my picture, so I don't want to show the rest of the picture because you already see enough. So, Spring Boot. I'm not going to be talking too long about Spring Boot, since it's very well known already, I think. But basically, what it does is it provides an opinionated view of building production-ready Spring applications. So what do they mean by that? Opinionated? Opinionated. They want you to get up and running with Spring as fast as possible. So in the old days, it could take a while to get your Spring application up and running. You need to write a lot of configuration, a lot of XML. Every time for every project, you needed to do the same thing. And check like what I have to do with this dispatcher servlet again, or all that kind of stuff. So Spring Boot makes that easier for you. They have this option of convention over configuration. So what they mean by that is they already assume a lot of things for you, so that you don't have to worry about it. And they already take care of many dependencies again, so you don't have to care about it. They offer also production-ready features like metrics, health checks, and externalized configuration. So in the form of endpoints and extra dependencies. No more XML, yay! That's been a while. You could already do all your configuration in Java, but now you don't really have to write a lot anymore to get like a solid Spring app running. And basically what we're going to talk about today is how the starter POMs simplify your configuration a lot in Maven. And we're going to talk about how it actually works behind the scenes. First, I'm going to give like a really short example of how fast you can create an app. I know that a lot of people already saw this, but just to show you, just go to start.spring.io, or you use the IDE. All the IDEs provide plugins for this exact thing. You go to this, you choose your version, snapshot version. You fill in your group, your demo, and you say, OK, I want a web application. There you go. You got your application. It's out here. I'll quickly scroll down, go to my downloads, and CD demo. I'll show what's in there so everyone sees. So basically, there's a demo application, Java class, there's an application properties, there's a test class, and there's a POM file. So let's check out the POM file. It doesn't contain much. Can everyone see this? Put it a bit bigger. So it's a basic POM. The most important part is the parent. It defines the parent, the Spring Boot Starter parent, which takes care of a lot of the dependencies that you might add, so you don't have to look up all the versions of all the different dependencies. There's some properties. Standard is Java 8, and it includes the Spring Boot Starter, like the biggest Spring Boot Starter there is, the Spring Boot Starter core, in fact, and it includes the test dependency, which we're not going to use right now. It also defines a Spring Boot Maven plugin, so when you want to package your application in jar, it takes care of that. So that's basically it. So if you do this, if you install as a Maven artifact, yeah, I haven't been working with the 1.41 a lot, so it has to download a lot. But basically, it will build your jar and process all the other dependencies and put all those jars in your jar. It's actually a pretty neat system if you go look into the source code, how it packs all the jars very efficiently. And then basically you can run the jar. I think it's demo, right? You run it if you have the correct, yeah, the web starter, okay. So that's basically the same one. So all the Spring Boot starters start with Spring Boot Starter. So if you're going to write your own Spring Boot Starter, you're not supposed to start with Spring Boot Starter. So it's better to use your own name or a unique identifier and then end with -- Spring Boot Starter. So if we do like this, we install it. It's going to bring in all the other dependencies. There we go. We got a working web application. So that's really simple. But now everyone, of course, wants to know, how does this work? So let me go to the presentation. So how does this work? A lot of people that start with Spring Boot have the notion or are a bit frustrated that we don't know how this works. We're losing control. How can we influence the configuration, etc.? So they might be a little frustrated, and they might think, well, how does it work? Is it magic? Did all the guys from Spring go into like a Pivotal office one night, drank a lot of beer, and then started writing some code? And then the day after, magically, they had something working, but they didn't know how. Well, is it magic? Yes, it's magic. They actually did this, and they went into a room, got drunk, they wrote something, and then that came out. Well, not really, that was a lie. So, damn it, these. So Phil Webb had an interesting tweet. There were a lot of complaints from people. They were saying like, the Spring Boot stuff is too much magic. We don't know what's going on. Make it less magic. But like a couple of years ago, everyone was complaining, this Spring application, you have to do so much configuration. It's crazy. Make it less configuration. So yeah, people always need to have something to complain about. That tweet was pretty popular back in March. And he has a good point. But don't worry. I'll explain everything about the Spring Boot starters. So let's try to make a Spring Boot application and see what happens. It's still a demo, so we'll see. Here's the business case of the small application. Let's get to work. So the FREP handheld business case has concluded the overall net cost benefit of a handheld is unacceptable, significantly different from the current no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to do that. That's too boring. We're going to do another business case, which is more fun. We're going to do a business case called Rock, Paper, Scissors, Lizard, Spock. I know a lot of people have seen this on Big Bang Theory, like Sheldon. He had a cool game. It's pretty complicated if you want to do it good. But basically, it's scissors cuts paper, paper covers rock, rock crushes lizard, lizard poisons Spock. Spock smashes scissors, scissors decapitates lizard, lizard eats paper, paper disproves Spock, Spock vaporizes rock, and as it always has, rock crushes scissors. So I went out and I tried to make a starter or a web application which implements this as a game. And I had some requirements, right? So I wanted to be lightweight. I wanted to be stateless, because I want to scale it. Like when my game is really popular, everyone in the world is playing it, I want to be stateless. I want to be cloud native for the same reason. Well, stateless is one of the key things of cloud native. And I want to do authentication over Twitter, so I want to use Spring Social and Spring Security and bring them together. But I don't want to use JDBC. So if any of you know, Spring Social has like, Spring Social Security has 2 implementations to hold the Twitter information, like the auth key and the refresh token, stuff like that. And they don't want to get it from Twitter every time. So they hold it in like some kind of social connection object. And there's basically 2 implementations, an in-memory implementation and a JDBC implementation. But as I said, we don't want JDBC implementation. So I went out and I wanted to make a Redis implementation, which is like a distributed cache, and you can scale it horizontally together with your application. So I also want to make it stateless, so I'm going to use Spring Session to store the session also in Redis. That's my backup plan. So I'm going to show the little starter that I made. And let me see. So this is the application. And it has some configuration like security configuration. It's pretty regular security, except I'm adding the security configurer, which is a Spring Social configurer. And the Spring Social configurer is coming from my starter. So I'm going to show the starter, which is a little bit, well, not really bigger. But I have the autoconfiguration. I have 2, but that one is for later. And basically, this is how a starter can look like. So if I open the POM, you see that I have a lot of dependencies. I have my regular artifact details, my personal details, GitHub stuff. And then I include the Spring Boot autoconfigure. So this is the one that you want to include your autoconfiguration code. Then you have your dependencies that you're always going to need. It's not optional. If you're going to use the starter, you're going to need it. So there's this thing called Spring Data Redis, and especially version 1.7 and up provides Redis repositories, where you just use regular repositories like in data.jpa, and you can persist them to Redis in the same way as in data.jpa. So I can show an example. It's basically you have not an entity, but a Redis hash. You give it a name, and then you can have a couple of indexes where you want to search on, and some fields. And it will be stored in Redis like transparently for you. So this is a social Redis connection repository. It's basically the same as in data.jpa. You have a CRUD repository, and you just provide some interface methods. And Spring Data Redis will take care of the rest. I also contributed this implementation to the Spring Social project. It's in a pull request. It still needs some work, so I'm probably going to finish that later this month, I think, and then try to get it committed in the project. So basically, if you want to do the Redis thing, you have to implement 2 interfaces, which is the user's connection repository and the connection repository, which is, this one is specifically per person. So it's all the implementation details, not important. More important is what you want to talk about is the auto configuration. So basically, what do you need to do to get an auto configuration in the starter? So basically, you have to annotate it with @configuration, and you have to mention it or specify it in the spring.factories file, which is in the meta-inf folder. So the key is the enable auto configuration class. And then you define values, one or more values of auto configurations that you wish to load when you load the starter. So in your regular application, if you include the starter, Spring has a Spring Factories loader class, which looks in the class path at all the meta-inf folders and looks after, it searches for spring.factories files. It checks all these files, it finds the auto configurations and loads them in. These auto configurations are all loaded in a specific order, and you can define this order if you want to load something before another one or after it. So basically, Spring figures out the order, loads all the auto configurations, as well as this one. So the second important part are the conditional annotations. So this one is conditional on class. And what it means is this auto configuration will only be loaded if the Redis connection factory class, this one, is on the class path. So Spring Boot has a very efficient way of checking this, and it will not load the configuration, this configuration class or this auto configuration if it's not on the class path. You also have the conditional on bean, but they only work on other beans. So you can't put conditional on bean or conditional on missing bean. You can't put them on configuration classes. You can also, as I said, specify an order. You can auto-configure after and auto-configure before. So basically, I want to configure it before my own Twitter Redis auto-configuration, which is a thing I had to do. You can see it's in the Spring Framework package. Because basically, the normal Twitter auto-configuration always takes the in-memory implementation, and you can't override it. I've been struggling with it for a while. If anyone can help me, the repository is online, and you can have a look. If you can fix it, I'll give you like more than one beer. So this Twitter Redis auto configuration is very much like the old one, but I have like some override methods, for instance, over here, the ID source. And I'm basically using another configuration properties namespace. So that's another cool thing. Configuration properties are properties that you can define yourself. So in Spring Boot, you can use configurations properties in the configuration files or in the application.properties files. And you can define your own. And even in the IDEs, you get really cool autocomplete and everything. So if I were to go to the application properties file, I could use this namespace and add app ID and fill it in or override it, whatever. So that's a really cool feature as well. I think basically this is the most important one. So the Redis connection factory is the one that you want to use in your main application, right? So if your main application adds the Redis connection factory or adds a working Redis connection factory, this bean will be loaded as a primary bean, and it will generate this Redis template and set the Redis connection factory. So if you don't have a Redis connection factory in your main application, this will never get loaded. This one is not that, it's an implementation detail, so not that important. So I'm ready to show the application. So I told you the security configurer is the one that I configured in the Twitter auto configuration class. So it will find the bean on the class path and use this one. I have a social configuration, which is basically how I want to sign in, and it has the connection factory. So it's the JDIS client implementation that I'm using, and I'm going for local hosts on a Docker Redis image. So Docker is running a Redis locally, and he'll connect to that. This is the WebSocket configuration, which is basically for the game to have a couple of endpoints. I can send chat messages and I can send game messages. The controller, not really that important. You have like 2 basic endpoints for my templates, my time leaf templates. And then you have the game endpoints for the chat and events. And you have a player endpoint to check out your current, well, your own information, to get your own information. This one also for authentication purposes. So it's basically Spring social security. Then you have some chat messages, game events, game messages, and a player object. But the main application basically is still just a Spring Boot application. The Spring Boot application is an annotation, and it contains this very important one, the @enable autoconfiguration. So this is the one that starts off the entire autoconfiguration lifecycle, or whatever you want to call it, and it does the ordering, it checks all the beans, it checks all the conditions, and if you have the actuator dependency, it will also make the actuator endpoints like autoconfig and the /beans. So if you want to check out the application, I'll just run it here. All right. So this is basically rock, paper, scissors, lizard, Spock. It has explanations on how to play. And you can log in through Twitter. So go to Twitter, authenticate yourself, and then come back. It's basically the same page, and then it knows you're authenticated, and it will add some more. You have a chat that goes over WebSockets, and then if I say hello, you can see that it's sending over sock.js and Stomp. It's sending messages back and forth. So if I create a new window, I log in. I have to fill in my credentials. The only annoying thing is it's me and me. So this is me, and this is me. So if I say hello here, it sends a WebSocket message, and then it gets sent out to the topics and to the other one. So if I want to join, I click here. It fetches my player information, gets my Twitter image, and then it fills in my Twitter handle. Same here. The problem is, on player 2, it checks if player 1 is not the same as me, so I can't play as player 2 as well. So the problem is, I wanted to show this to you guys on the fly, and I wanted to deploy it to PCF, and I did. So if you want to go to PCF, I think it's somewhere over here. Yeah, so it's running rock, paper, scissors, lizard, Spock, .cfapps.io. It's running on pdubs. And as you can see, I'm having problems with the WebSockets. I've saw some issues about it. I don't really know how to fix it in the short notice. I only saw it at the end when I deployed, so that was a bit bad on my part. But basically, when I log in, it comes back, and then it gives me the WebSocket error. So I wanted to show you guys, I deployed it, and I wanted to play with you guys during the presentation, but yeah, it's not going to be work. So if anyone can help me with that, much appreciated. So if we can't play with this, we need to have another game, right? So I'm going back to the presentation. And I'm going to, put this thing here. So that was that business case. This is my backup plan. Josh Long is always my backup plan. So everyone knows Josh Long, the Spring guru who goes all over the world to talk to so many people and then give much talks and wear down his own voice. And we're going to play Josh Long Pokemon. So Josh Long has this game on Twitter. He's during the conference, he's meeting everyone, and he's trying to get a selfie with all the very important people of Spring and Pivotal. So I basically want to make a starter which provides by default an endpoint where you can get random Josh Long pics, Josh Long Pokemon. So it's a Spring Boot starter. It needs to provide an endpoint to retrieve Josh Long's Pokemon. And I want to make it somewhat configurable. So that's much simpler than the other one. So I'll show you the code. Where's this one? With all these windows. So this is the auto configuration. This is the starter. So basically, I have some random Twitter pics from yesterday. I call them the wild Pokemon. And the most important thing, again, is the add configuration. And as I said, also the spring.factories file. So every time, same thing. This will get loaded automatically, and he'll find the auto configuration class. What I'm doing is I'm doing another component scan because it's easier, and I'm lazy, and it will find this Josh Long Pix controller. And this is also a cool one. You have conditional on class, conditional on bean, missing class, conditional on property, but you also have conditional on web application, and that's a pretty big one. It's basically a condition, and they made a Spring Boot team made like a very shortcut condition class, Spring Boot condition, which you can extend, and basically it does a lot of stuff to check if you have a web application. I haven't looked into it too much. So what our auto configuration does is it has the random pictures. You can get this from a database or whatever, or from a web source. And I have a couple of beans. You can see that they all return the same bean, or the same bean class. So you're thinking, I'm going to have a conflict or something. He's going to have, if you want to auto-wire this bean in your main application, he's not going to find the correct one. But basically, they all have different kinds of annotations. Conditional on missing bean is just saying that if you don't have a picture provider, take this one. And conditional on property checks for a property called josh.long.pix, having the value random. So if the property has that value, it will basically return a random pick provider, and it's basically doing a random and going over the list and giving you a random image. The next one is also conditional on missing bean and conditional on property picks ordered. So this is giving you an ordered pick provider. And you can go on and make your starter very configurable this way. You can also make your own conditions, as I showed in the conditional on web application. Basically, you implement the condition class, or you extend the very easy Spring Boot condition class, which has a lot of shorthand methods. And by default, without the property, if the property does not exist, I'm going to pick the ordered pick provider as well. So this is basically very simple. It takes the picks, copies them, orders them, and returns them. And then every time it just goes over the next one. So that's my starter. I don't have any application properties in my starter. You could add some defaults, but usually you want to do the properties on your application side, which uses the starter. And I've already run it, I think. I can run it again. There we go, build success. And then this is the application. It's really small. Again, it's a Spring Boot application. And basically, I have an index file with jQuery and my custom JavaScript. It goes to the Josh Long endpoint, which I created here. I didn't show this one yet. The Josh Long endpoint just gets the picture provided, which is auto-wired at runtime, and it gets the next picture. So it gets the URL of the picture. And on this one, I retrieve one of the Josh Long Pokemon pictures, I log it, and I set the attribute of the source. So that's my best JavaScript you're ever going to see. So let's run it. I think it's going to fail because the other one is running, but I want to show that as well. I think Stefan Nicole also showed it already. So this is such a lifesaver and time saver. You'll always find what's wrong, but this one saves time, and you immediately know, okay, this other application is still running. Shut it down. So that's a really cool feature from Spring Boot 1.4. So my application started, and you can see that it mapped the Josh Long Pix controller. So I didn't have to do anything for that except add the dependency of the starter. So it's really a very simple process, not many magic going on. You just have to know how it works. And I have some application properties, which is josh.long.pix random. So if I go to the application, my very, very cool application, Josh Long, Pokemon, gotta catch them all. So if you refresh, so now it's in random mode. It has the random, so you could probably get twice the same picture. Yeah, you saw it there. Twice the same picture in a row. Sergey Almar here. We went out last night. He's a very cool guy. You should talk to him. And that's about it. So I just, if I change the property or use like the Spring Netflix cloud config server, and I can change the properties on the fly. But I'll do it like this for the moment. Probably have to restart. So now it should go nicely in order and not show any. It's hard to see because they're not numbered or anything, but just to show you, you have the, as I said, you had the autoconfig. Oh wait, my plugin is not loading in the. There we go. So when you go to the autoconfig endpoint, which is enabled by the Spring Boot actuator, you can see the positive matches it found and the negative matches. So usually you're less interested in the negative matches, but you want to see the positive ones. And you can search for Josh Long. As you can see here, Josh Long Iman, that's how I called it initially, autoconfiguration, and it finds the Josh Long Iman autoconfiguration ordered Josh Long pick provider. So in the properties, it was ordered, so it's going to give you that bean. And it shows you the condition. It was an on bean condition, and the conditional on missing bean. And that's about it. If you check out the negative matches, you see the other one, the default and the randomized. So those are negative matches. It's always handy to see this and to see why it didn't load. So it expected the random property for properties joshlong.pix. So that's really handy to check out why isn't the starter working as I thought it did, thought it should, and what do I have to do to change it. I'll remove this. So this was pretty basic. That was my backup plan. Let's recap very quickly. The auto configuration is not magic. As you saw, you can explain everything that's happening, and the pivotal guys didn't go in a room and get drunk. Maybe they did, but they didn't write Spring Boot during. And so the first thing is Spring Boot application enables the auto configuration with the annotation. The Spring Factories loader removes the need for class path scanning because that can take a while, right? If you have a big class path, you just want to go to the auto configuration class, and it will only do the things that you want to do. It won't scan the entire class path. Conditional on class and bean, or on missing class and missing bean, are really handy to make your Spring Boot starter configurable. The naming thing is, I mentioned that. Do not start with Spring Boot starter, even if you think it's going to be adopted right away by the Spring team, and they really want to keep this this namespace for them for future references. So you can just add Josh Longiman - Spring Boot starter. Another important thing that you might not see in the beginning, and which might baffle you a bit, the auto configurations are all executed after the normal application context is loaded. So if you're wondering why is this bean getting loaded and why is this bean not getting loaded, this is probably the reason. And you can also order the different kinds of auto configurations. As I say here, auto configure before and after are really handy to make sure that some beans are already configured before others. you can have the autoconfig endpoint, the actuator endpoint, but you can also do it with debug mode. So in most IDEs, you can do like enable debug, or you can just give the -- debug parameter at startup. And the actuator I told you already. So I think I'm going to end pretty quickly because of the not playing of games that we did. But if you have any questions, I'll be willing to answer them. Yeah. All right, so the question was, if you want to combine different kinds of dependencies or starters or configurations, how do you do that? Well, basically you would just create different kinds of autoconfigs, like with @configuration class, make different kinds of classes, add your dependencies as optional if you can, because you don't want to load them together with your main application. If you're not going to use it, or if it's not going to be enabled, you don't want those on the class spot. But you can basically make different kind of autoconfigs and add them all to the spring.factories file. So it will load them in the correct order. Yes?
What is a good pattern for the version of the start? Do they need to match your application version?
Okay, the question is, what do you need for, what do you do with versioning of your starters? Basically, you version it like any other like any other Maven dependency. You can use your own versioning. The only thing you have to do in your main application where you pull in the dependency, you have to just specify the correct version. So it doesn't have to be the same. But, of course, in the starter, you're going to use some kind of version of Spring. So maybe you could use properties files or make sure they are aligned. Because if you use in your starter, for example, the 1.3.6, and then in your main application, you're using Spring 1.4, it might have some breaking changes between them, and it might break the application. So the version of the starter itself is not important. The version of the Spring Boot dependency should be as much the same as you can. It doesn't have to be strictly the same version. Yes?
Do you have any guides up for creating your own starter?
Well, the easiest way is in the Spring documentation. It's explained very well. Usually, in the documentation, they also explain how you should package them a bit. Usually, they advise you to make the autoconfigure dependency, and the other one is like basically two Maven artifacts. You have the autoconfigure artifact, and then the artifact which pulls in all the dependencies. So the autoconfigure one is with only one dependency, and you have the Spring Boot autoconfigure dependency. And there you can put then you have all the annotations to make your configuration and the auto loading stuff. And in the second one, you just list up all your optional dependencies. So, but you can put them in one artifact like I did. They say you can do both. Yeah, does that answer your question? Yeah. Oh. Yes? So if I understand correctly, how do I add two servlet filters with different names maybe, or? Yeah, I think you should use the regular Spring setup, like use different qualifiers, and you can make them conditional. You can make them both conditional, or you can play around with the configuration, right? But basically, if you have two beans of the same class or the same type, you would do it like in any other Spring configuration. You would use qualifiers, and when you auto-wire them in your main application, you also use those qualifiers. You have to know a bit about the starter then, but yeah. Yes? You want to know more about that? All right, I'll show you. So it's really pretty easy. I didn't show the properties, that's correct. So basically, I'll show it in this one. For example, the Twitter auto-configuration has Twitter Redis properties file, which is a regular class. and you just annotate it with I'll make it bigger for you. You can just add it with, annotate it with add configuration properties, and you give it a namespace. And then all the properties that are in the properties file are auto-completable in the properties files. So if I go up here, you have a conditional on a property, and then the property is spring.social. So it will check it out. But basically, the IDEs all offer support for, they scan the class path, and they process the annotations, and they give you auto-completion. Anything else? Yeah? Yeah? Yeah, so all the Spring Boot starter, all the different kind of Spring Boot starters that Spring offers, and that they auto-configure automatically in any Spring Boot application. I'll show you in a minute. All these ones have the same naming conventions. They have Spring Boot Starter Web, Spring Boot Starter Data GPA, and that's why they want to avoid that you use the same namespace. So you can use your starter anything you want, but to make it clear that it's a starter, you could just add at the end Spring Boot Starter. That's a bit the common convention. Yeah, of course, yeah. Just, it's a convention, you can play with it, but you can add stuff like that if you want, yeah. No problem. Just don't use their namespace. They like have a warning about it. I'll maybe show the Spring Boot. It already has, it's a pretty big file. Can't really miss it. So this is an example of the Spring Boot AutoConfigure Starter. So this also has a spring.factories file, and it also has the enable autoconfiguration key in the file. And basically, it lists all the different kinds of Spring Boot starters that are out there. So it doesn't necessarily load in those configurations, but it goes to all these configuration classes and checks the conditions. So basically, the AOP auto-configuration, this class will get loaded, and I'm not sure how they do it that you don't get runtime exceptions here, because these classes don't need to be on the class path, but they found a way to do that. But it basically checks this configuration class. I think it's with reflection, so it doesn't actually have to load the class. But this will not be loaded if you don't have anything aspect J related on your class path. So this is a really quick process, and it goes over all these auto-configuration classes quickly. If you don't use any of them, only the web, it will only load that one. That's how they do it. So I think it's a pretty annoying job to keep this up to date for the guys from Spring Boot, but they do all the heavy lifting for us, and we can use it. Any more questions? Yeah. It's better to create, the question was if you want to override some of the Spring Boot auto configurations, right? It would be better to create your own starter and load it before the other one. So the other one will get loaded, but if you go into one of the, for example, this one, that's a bad example. Nope. Yeah, for example, this one. if you want to override this one, you make your own auto-configuration. You define the same kind of bean, and you make sure that it runs before this one. So you make sure that it runs at autoconfigure before the JSON auto-configuration class. That's basically how you would do it. And this one will not load then, because it only loads when it's missing. So this class will not get loaded. So that's how you would do it. You wouldn't go into their code, or you wouldn't have to do that. You can just make your own starter and override it. Does that answer the question a bit? All right. So I think we're good to go. If there are no more questions, I invite you to take a look at the repository. If you can fix the WebSocket problem, I'm going to have to look with Rossen and another guy from that team to fix my problem. Yeah, go out and try to create your own Spring Boot starter. There's a lot of examples on GitHub, and it's really powerful. Thank you.